Right. So today we're going to start off with talking first about what you need to know when you have temporary residence. And you guys are all temporary residents as international students with study permits. Okay. So first of all, studying and working on your study permit, what do you need to know? Just because you have a study permit, first of all, it doesn't mean that you can't lose your student status, even while it's still valid. In order to maintain your student status, you have to actively pursue your studies, okay? And if you don't actively pursue your studies after 90 days, you lose your status. So what does it mean by actively pursuing your studies? It means you're attending classes, you're going for your exams, you are enrolled as a student at the school. There are two exceptions to this rule. One is if you're on a scheduled break. What's a scheduled break? It's if you are on a break that is noted in the academic calendar of the school. Okay, so if everybody in your program is going on a break, that's the scheduled break. Authorized leave is something that is more personal to yourself. So sometimes you might experience a situation where, for example, you have some health problems, or maybe your grandmother is sick, you need to visit her, or whatever it is, and you can't be a student at that semester. What you can do is you should go to your school ahead of time before you take the semester off and ask the school to give you permission to have authorized leave. And if they do give you that permission, then you have authorized leave for up to 150 days. That's the max time you can have authorized leave for each period. If you do have that, then that time that you're on authorized leave, you still are able to maintain your status as a student. Okay. All right, so let's talk about working while you are studying, okay? First of all, if you don't have another work permit, you can only work while you are a full-time student, not when you're a part-time student, not when you are not studying, for example, like when you're on authorized leave. When you're on authorized leave, you're not a full-time student, you cannot work at all, okay? There is an exception in the last semester. If you are a part-time student in the last semester, you are allowed to work. But other than that, you have to be a full-time student. Sometimes people say, well, I have a co-op work permit, I can work, right? Just be careful. The co-op work permit allows you to work only in your co-op program. Just because you have a co-op work permit doesn't mean you can work anywhere, okay? You can work because of your study permit, but only under specified conditions. How many hours are you allowed to work right now if you're a full-time student and you're studying off campus? How many hours? After April 30th, you can work 20 hours, okay? No longer are you allowed to work full-time. If you are on campus, you can still work full-time. You can technically work on campus full-time, off campus 20 hours, but I don't know when you're going to be able to study. Okay. But you can work only if you're a full-time student. Now, when you have completed your studies, you're no longer a student. So when you get that first indication from the school that you have completed your studies, at that point, you can't work at all. You have to stop working, okay? The only exception to that rule is you can work in between programs if you're going to take a second program and you've already been accepted to the second program. So let's say I'm finishing my program in April, and then I'm starting another program in September. If I've already been accepted to the second program in September, I can work that summer in between. Okay, it has to be less than 150 days, so just one semester in between. All right.
So another really important thing to understand while you're studying is what you need to do to maintain your status while you're here in Canada. So the first thing you want to do, after this session is go track down your study permit and make note of the day that it's going to expire. Make sure it's in your calendar, write it down on your phone. Make sure you understand when that study permit is going to expire. And if your study permit's going to expire before your program finishes, you need to apply to extend your study permit before that expiry date. Another key thing to understand in all of this is implied status. So when you submit an extension application, as long as you submit it properly and you submit it before the expiry date on your study permit, you're allowed to have what's called implied or maintained status while you're waiting for a decision on that application. So as long as you apply for that extension before the expiry date on your study permit, you can continue studying in Canada while you're waiting for IRCC to process the extension or give you a decision on the application. One thing that's really important to know, though, is that if you have implied status, so if you're waiting for a decision on that application and your study permit has expired, you are required to be in Canada while you wait for that decision on the new application. Otherwise, if you leave Canada, your implied status will end. So let's say you wake up and you realize that you did actually miss the expiry date on your study permit and you've gone beyond it. And so you might still be in what's called the restoration period. So from the expiry date on your study permit, you have 90 days to restore your status. So if you've lost your status, you can apply to get your status back by submitting a restoration application. But it's really, really important to note that the timelines are very strict on restoration. So you have exactly 90 days from when you lose your status to apply for it. And keep that in mind if you're going to be trying to restore your status. They're not very flexible about those 90 days. If your study permit has expired, you've got that 90 days from the date that's listed on your permit as the expiry. And if you've applied for an extension and it gets refused, then you have 90 days from the day on that refusal letter to submit a restoration application. Oh, Elizabeth, you're on mute.
Thank you. I knew that was bound to happen at least once a time. All right. So let's talk about postgrad work permits. So the thing about the postgrad work permit is it's a very valuable work permit, but it is only valid one time you can only get it one time in your lifetime. Okay. People often ask me, oh, okay, so after my postgrad work permit expires, how do I extend the work permit? Well, the question is not how do I extend the work permit, is can I extend the work permit? Because for a lot of you guys, you may not be able to extend the postgrad work permit. So it's very important to start planning even while you are attending your program, because certain programs will allow you to get a 3-year postgrad work permit and certain programs won't. If you have a program in between the 8-month to 2 years, you're supposed to only get a work permit for that length of time. So if you were doing a 1-year program, you get a 1-year work permit. If you do a 2-year program or more, you get the 3-year work permit, and you can combine your programs. So if you did a 1-year program and then you did another 1-year program and you don't apply for the postgrad work permit in between the programs, when you finish the 2 programs, you can also apply to get a 3-year work permit as well. Okay, we have a question here.
I have a question.
Yes.
If I get my study permit, I finish my program, I get my postgrad work permit, I work, and then I decide I'm going to study again. Just to be clear, I can't get another postgrad work permit after that.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right. You have to be very judicious in when you're going to apply for postgrad. So for example, sometimes I have people who don't attend my webinars come to me and they say, Okay, well, I finished my undergrad, so I qualified for a work permit, so I applied, and then I went to do my master's, and then when I finished my master's, what do I do now? I said, why did you apply for the postgrad work permit after your undergrad? Oh, because I could. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, okay? You should start planning on how to get your permanent residence as early as possible. Even if you don't qualify yet, you need to know what you need to do in order to qualify.
Okay, so even applying for the postgrad work permit disqualifies you from getting another one.
Well, usually if you apply, you get it. So if you
Okay.
canceled it before you got it, then you can qualify for another one. But most people, they apply for it, they get it, they don't use it, but that doesn't mean that they can get another work permit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Another thing that you have to keep in mind for the postgrad is distance education. During COVID, there were a lot of rules that relaxed this distance education requirement, but now it's back to the old rules. So make sure that at least 50% of your program or more is not distance, it's in class. Okay. And finally, full-time status at school. This is something that Mary, who works a lot with students, see a lot. We have students who, didn't know that if you do not maintain your full-time student status in every single semester, except the last semester, then you could be disqualified for the postgrad work permit, okay? Sometimes you have situations where you might not be able to get the grade that you want in a class, right? You might fail the class. In that situation, sometimes people are tempted to just withdraw from the class so that you at least, you can maintain, you can show you have good grades. That's good for, other things, but for immigration, that's pretty deadly for the postgrad work permit. I would much rather have a student go through the class, go write the exam, fail the exam, but still show up on the transcript that you're a full-time student, than for you to withdraw the classes so that it appears that you only had enough classes for part-time student status. Because if that happens, you may have to redo your another program in order to qualify for the postgrad work permit. Okay. Sometimes I have students who say, well, I just can't maintain a full-time student status in this semester. Something's going on in my life. I'm just going to do the part-time and hope, that the immigration is going to be kind. Don't ever think that immigration is kind, okay? The officers are supposed to behave like robots for the most part. They don't really have that sympathy built into their job description. If you cannot maintain full-time student status, you're probably better off asking to take the entire semester off, ask the school for authorized leave, rather than do part-time student status. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Finally, let's talk about when you can.
Sorry, we did have a question. I was just slow.
Mhm.
Okay. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Diksha, and I do have a questions. At this point of time, can I ask some question about my spouse?
So a couple of things.
Yeah.
We're gonna have a question and answer at the end.
Oh,
for
okay.
General questions.
Yeah, that's why I
Okay.
asked. And one thing about this topic is, what if I study for 2 years and I get a 3 years work permit?
Yes.
And what if I plan to study for 2 years full-time like course again? Then what happens?
You don't get the postgrad work permit. You'll have
But I will be able to work part-time that time, right?
while you're studying, yes.
Oh, yeah.
While you're
Okay.
studying, yes, but you don't get the postgrad afterwards.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for your questions. I just wanted to let you guys know this session is recorded, and afterwards, we do put this online on YouTube in order for people to review this afterwards. So it's not appropriate for you guys to ask personal questions. General questions, like the lady was just asking, is absolutely fine. But personal questions, please don't ask them at this time, okay? We'll provide information for you afterwards if you wanted to come for a consultation when we can go over a plan for you, okay? Okay, so let's go back in talking about how to and when to apply for your postgrad work permit. So online, the IRCC website will tell you that you have 180 days to apply for your postgrad work permit. But I'm here to tell you that don't use the 180 days. If you go to the 180 days, you will have lost your student status after 90 days. And there will be a lot of issues. You have to file for restoration. You can't work, etc. Okay, don't use 180 days. Use my rule, which is 90 days. Why 90 days? Because you lose your status after 90 days for your student status. So in order to apply for the postgrad work permit and work while you're waiting for your work permit, you need to have student status. It's either 90 days or if your study permit expires before the 90 days, then the study permit, whichever is earlier. Does that make sense? Okay, so if I finish in April 30th, I have until July 28th or so, right, to apply for the 90 days. But if my study permit expires on June 30th, my deadline is June 30th. If my study permit expires August 30th, then my deadline is July 28th, whichever comes earlier. Okay? If you do so, if you apply within those deadlines, then even if you don't have your work permit in hand, you can start working full-time right away. Okay? So let's just talk about a timeline. Let's just go over this. So let's say you're writing your final exams. Okay, you're full-time students, then you can work at that point. You're waiting for your results. Can you work? Yes, you're still a full-time student, so you can work at that point. Now, you receive the first notification that the school has given you that you've completed your program. It could maybe come through your portal. It could be in the form of your transcript. Okay, it could be a letter. It's definitely not when you get your diploma or your degree. Okay, it's certainly long before that. But as soon as you have received that first notification, you are no longer considered a full-time student. So you have to stop working then. You can then start working as soon as you have submitted your postgrad work permit application within how many days? 90 days. Or if your study permit expires earlier, before your study permit expires. And you can work full-time at that time. Okay? All right. Let's move to a permanent residence.
So, so if you look at, as we go through different kind of PR routes in the next couple slides, you're going to find that many of them have a requirement for what's called high-skilled work experience. So it's very important to know whether a job that you're going to take is considered a high-skilled job or a low-skilled job, so that you know whether it's going to qualify you for your PR plan. So what's the difference between high-skilled and low-skilled work? IRCC has categorized all of the different jobs into these different national occupation codes, or NOC codes. And each of the NOC codes is divided into 6 tiers. Tier 0, 1, 2, and 3 are considered high-skilled, whereas tier 4 and 5 are considered low-skilled. And something that's really important to know about this system is that when people look into their NOCs, sometimes they think that it's based off of their job title, but it's actually based off of the duties that you do every day. So even if somebody says that they're a CEO, but they actually do the job every day of a janitor, then they're actually a janitor, and vice versa. So you need to understand what your job duties are and how they correspond to your NOC code. Another thing that's really important to do when you're going to be taking on a job is just understanding that knock codes do change. For example, in 2022, the entire system was overhauled. And another thing that we see a lot of the time is people kind of just relying on what their friends have done or what their other employees at the company have said. And it's really important to make sure for yourself that your job does qualify you with the proper knock and not just rely on what other people are doing or what you read online. That can be a common error that people do tend to make when it comes to knock codes. So you do just want to make sure that you have the correct one and that you're doing a job that's going to qualify you for PR when you're getting employment after school.
So just wanted to also touch base on the mandatory employment requirements. On these knock codes, they will say something about what is required for the occupation, okay? And sometimes they'll say is usually required, and sometimes they will say is required. If for example, a software developer, okay, on there probably will say university degree in computer science is usually required. Does that mean that somebody can be a software developer if they don't have a university degree? Yes, because usually doesn't mean always, okay? But if you take a look at, for example, a lawyer, it will say a law degree is required. Does that mean someone can be a lawyer if they don't have a law degree? No, they cannot be classified as a lawyer. They have to have a law degree. Okay, so be very careful. Sometimes, for example, we'll see certain occupations and that have this is required remark on the description, and that's and if you don't have that, we can't really classify you as that occupation. So we've included a link here for those of you who want to search and take a look. It's always a good idea to see what occupation classification you might belong to as well. Okay. Again, I'll send out these slides to everyone who's registered and signed up as well. And also just a note, for those of you online who have questions, please put them in the Q&A button there, and we will try to answer as many of your questions as possible at the end. All right, let's talk about, first of all, express entry, which is the most common one that people know. How many of you guys have heard about express entry? Yeah? Yeah,
I'm
quite a
seeing
few
some
of you,
hands in
right?
here.
Yes,
Definitely.
good. Okay, so there's a lot of people who know about or heard about, and there's also a lot of misunderstandings about express entry. So let's go back to basics. How express entry works is first you have to create an online profile. To create an online profile, you have to qualify under one of three categories: the Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, or the Federal Skilled Trades class. And if you can create an online profile, you will go into the express entry pool. Now, if you are in the express entry pool, does that mean that you have applied for permanent residence? No, it does not mean that you have applied. I get this all the time. People say, oh, I've applied for permanent residence. I said, oh, when did you get your invitation to apply? They said, I didn't get one. If you have not received what's called an invitation to apply, you have not applied for permanent residence yet. You're just in the pool. You're just a candidate. You have told the immigration that you'd like to apply for permanent residence. When you get into the pool, you'll get a series of points called your CRS score. Okay, and that's based on your background and also whether or not you have received provincial nomination. And every 2 weeks or so, the government will have a draw where they will invite people who are in the pool to apply for permanent residence. It's only after you've received the ITA, invitation to apply, then you can actually apply for permanent residence. Okay. So before we get to how to get your invitation to apply, let's first talk about how to get into the pool. Many of you may already be able to get into the pool, okay? If you have at least 1 year of high-skilled work experience in any country, even when you've received that work experience while you are studying, and it's 1 year full-time, which is at least 30 hours a week, and it could be when you're self-employed even, okay? But it's only in one occupation for that 1 year. That work experience qualifies you to get into the pool under the federal skilled worker class. The federal skilled worker class also takes a look at the combination of your other factors and see whether or not you meet minimum score for the federal skilled worker class. And you also need to have enough financial savings as well. But that's why I say that many of you, if you already have that kind of work experience, even if you got it outside of Canada or while you're studying, you can actually get into the pool, okay? There's a second category, and that's the one that's more well-known. It's called the Canadian Experience class. Now, for the second category, the work experience is very, very different. The work experience for the Canadian Experience class is 1 year in the last 3 years of work experience that you gained in Canada when you are not a full-time student, that you gained it legally. And it has to be something where you are employed by an employer in Canada, okay? What's the difference between being an employee and being a contractor? I often get people get confused. I'm a contractor if I have a contract? No, everybody should have a contract, okay? The difference between a contractor and an employee is essentially based on the relationship that you have with the employer. But in general, the officers look to see whether or not you have the documentation, such as a T4 slip, okay, a T4 slip. So what happens is in Canada, if you're a proper employee, your employer is supposed to collect income tax from your salary, deduct CPP, deduct EI. So in the end, the paycheck that you get is a lot less than, whatever they say the hourly rate is or whatever your salary is. Okay, that's a proper employee. And at the end of the year, by February, you should get a T4 for the work that you've received. Okay. If you're a contractor, for example, if I'm going to hire someone to paint my house, that person, I said, okay, how much are you going to paint my house? They said, okay, well, I'm going to charge you $3,000. I don't deduct any income tax or EI or CPP from them, right? I'm contracting them. They have their own business. They are in a contractor relationship with them. I don't control their work. I pay them to do the work, but I don't control their hours or anything like that. That's a contractor. Now, if any of you go and find a job with someone, and that person says, well, I don't want to bother my accountant. You just, whatever, I'll pay you by the hour. And, I'll just give you cash or I'll give you money or, even if I e-transfer you, but I don't want to bother my accountant. You just do your taxes whatever way you want in the end. In that situation, you don't have your T4, you don't have anything deducted, then the officers usually interpret that as being a contractor relationship. If you're a contractor relationship, not only do you not qualify for the Canadian Experience class, you also don't qualify for the work that you get points for express entry as well, okay? So be very careful about the kind of work that you accept and the kind of documentation relationship that you have with your employer. I'm not going to go too much into the skilled trades class. For most most of you, you're going to qualify under this Canadian Experience class or the Federal Skilled Worker class. All right, so now that you can get into the pool, let's talk about your points for getting out of the pool. What gives you guys your points? First of all, age. When you basically get to your 30s, every birthday that you have is no longer a happy birthday. Okay? Every year you get older in your 30s, your points go down, -5 points, -6 points. By the time you get to your 40s, it's a fast slide, -10, -11, every time it's your birthday. By the time you get to your 45th birthday, the good news is your points don't go down anymore. The bad news is you get a big fat 0 for your age points. Compared to someone in their 20s who have 110 points, that's a big difference. There's not a lot you can do about age except to apply as early as you can. Okay. Education. If you have a program of 3 years or more, it could be anywhere, like, before you came to Canada, it could be in Canada, outside Canada, and another program on top, then your points do jump by a lot. Language is very, very important. Right now, when the points are so competitive, most people will need to have at least the CLB 9 in language scores, which is for IELTS, you're looking at 7s in reading, writing, and speaking, and 8 in listening. CELPIP is 9s, and PT, that's there's 3 exams that you can do, okay? But CLB 9 for the language scores. Relevant Canadian work experience. So the Canadian work experience that gives you points is the same kind as what I described for the Canadian experience class, the one that you have to be employed when you're not a full-time student in Canada. If you have high-skilled work experience outside of Canada that you can prove, then that can also give you work experience and experience points. If you have a spouse who is kind of a super spouse, so they have a high level of education, language, Canadian work experience that's high skilled, we can add their points. Sometimes if they're not, if they don't have any points, it could take away from your score. Provincial nominee program, we're going to talk about that in a bit. And, provincial nominee programs are programs where the province gets to select people that they want to get permanent residence. And it's not every provincial nominee program that will give you extra 600 points. It has to be the provincial nominee programs that are express entry linked provincial nominee programs. If you get that, then you get 600 points added to your score. Previous study in Canada. So if you studied in a 1-year or 2-year program at Fanshawe, then you can get 15 points. Arranged employment points. So this is where you don't get arranged employment points if you have an open work permit, like the postgrad work permit. You can get arranged employment points. Normally you'll get 50 points if you have an employer-specific work permit or LMIA, okay? There are certain kinds of situations. For example, if you can speak French, then we can get a Francophone work permit. So certain people from certain countries, such as Mexico, US, Chile, Peru, EU, UK, different kinds of countries. If you're national of those countries and you have a job offer in Canada for certain professions, then we can get you a work permit that is not LMIA required. Otherwise, if you can get an LMIA, those will help you get your arranged employment points. If you have brothers or sisters who are Canadians or permanent residents in Canada, you get a few points there. Fluency in French, again, is very important. Now, people often ask, should I go and learn French? learning French, it's not just the basic French that will get you somewhere. You have to learn French to a certain level, a CLB 7, in order for it to be very meaningful for you for getting permanent residence. But if you can learn French to the CLB 5 level for speaking and listening, we can get you a Francophone work permit that will give you 50 points for arranged employment. Trade certification, most people, this doesn't really apply. It's for people in the construction trades. Okay. So taking a look at that, some people, may do well, but most people right now, especially since the points are well over 500 this year, you may not be competitive just as yet. There are, however, some category-based draws that some people may qualify for, or you might want to turn your mind towards, okay? There are people who are proficient in French. Again, that's the CLB 7 level. And then there are people in the healthcare occupations, STEM occupations, trade occupations, transport occupations, agriculture. And I've included a link here for more information. So looking at this, some of you, if you have 6 months of work experience in one of these occupations in the last 3 years, you can qualify for one of those draws. Some of you may not. And sometimes it might, however, be helpful for you guys to start planning. So for example, I had someone come to me. He was a philosophy major, couldn't really find, he was, doing work as a copywriter, etc. It's not one of the category-based draws, couldn't really get enough points. So, and he said, I'm just desperate, I just need to immigrate. So I said, well, go and drive a truck, because truck drivers are high skilled now, and they get special special draws under the transport occupations. So what this means is when you have a category-based draw, the government for that particular draw will only look at those people who qualified under this particular occupation. And therefore, the points will go much, much lower than the normal draws. Christopher, we have a question.
Yeah, I have a question.
Mhm.
If I'm in a contract relationship, for example, if I drove a truck and I was in a contract relationship, which I think is common,
Mhm.
would that help, or does it have to be an employee position?
It doesn't have to be.
Okay.
You can qualify under the first category to get into the pool called the federal skilled worker class.
Okay.
Okay.
And
But
go ahead.
yeah, so you can get into the pool. It depends on your points though. Maybe your English is not fantastic. You can get into the pool, but it's not fantastic. Or maybe you're older, etc. To be as an employee in Canada, you will then get the points for Canadian work experience.
Right.
So that might be important from that employee sort of relationship. Okay.
Okay. And one other question, these new category-based draws, is this like when they say draws, my mind automatically goes to like, they just pick randomly a whole bunch of people that are within this category. Is that the case, or is this also within there, they pick the highest points within these categories?
Exactly. It's not a lottery per se. Lotteries are just random draws.
Yeah.
These draws are based still on points, but they're based on the occupations. So for example, the STEM occupations, the points are still very high. They're drawing at 480, 470s, because there's still a lot of people in there, and usually they have very high education, so the points are very high. For the healthcare, it was much lower, maybe 230s or 240s. Sorry, 440s. I'm talking about 400s. So STEM was 470s, 480s. Healthcare would be 430s, for example. Transport might be 300s, right?
Is there a way for students to see like what point
Yes.
levels are being accepted, like at the current time for
Yes,
each category?
it's you can see on the IRCC website. So I'll send these slides out there. This is where the category-based draws, and then there's links from that website to previous draws. So you can see what's going on with previous draws, but it's not necessarily going to be the same with future draws, but at least you get a sense of what happened before.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so as Elizabeth mentioned, there are other ways that you can get points in express entry through the provincial nominee programs, or those are also called P&Ps. So Ontario's provincial nominee program is called the OINP, and it does have several different kinds of streams. So some of Ontario's streams are linked directly through express entry. And the way those ones work is if you receive a nomination from Ontario through these streams, it can add 600 extra points to your express entry score, which basically ensures that you're going to get an invitation to apply for PR through express entry. So how do they work? In Ontario, you can't just go and directly apply to the OINP express entry streams. You actually have to be in the express entry pool first, and then you're waiting to receive a notification of interest from Ontario. Then, only if Ontario is interested in you, then they'll send you a notification of interest, and then you can apply and get the 600 extra points to your CRS score. So a lot of the time people come to us and they say, how can I get the 600 extra points? If you're in the express entry pool, Ontario knows that your application is in there, and they'll let you know only if they want you to get those 600 extra points. And it's important to kind of understand who they're going to be giving these notifications of interest to. So there are three categories that they've identified. The first is the human capital priorities stream. And so in order to receive a notification of interest in this stream, you do need to be in the express entry pool, and you also need to have a bachelor's degree. That bachelor's degree doesn't have to be from inside of Canada, it can be from overseas. And then within this category, they've specified certain candidates that they might be interested in. For example, in the past, they've prioritized people who are working in tech, sometimes people in healthcare, sometimes people in the trades. They basically often they'll list several knock codes and a CRS score that they're giving these invitations out for. And it's a little bit unpredictable sometimes with this stream that Ontario will just define what they want, and it's hard to anticipate really what they're looking for until they've done the invitation. The next category that they've identified is for French speakers. So for this category, people need to have a bachelor's degree, and they also need to have a high level of French at a CLB level of 7 and a 6 in English. And so those people that are in the express entry pool with those qualifications might also receive a notification of interest from Ontario through this stream. The third stream is one that targets people who are in the skilled trades. So if you're in the express entry pool and you have at least 1 year of work experience in Ontario within the last 2 years, in one of the trades that Ontario has specified, you could receive a notification of interest and get 600 extra points. For this stream, you don't need to have a bachelor's degree or any specific education. As long as you have a work permit and you've been working for a year in Ontario in one of those skilled trades, you could get those extra points through this stream. So those are the express entry linked streams. And now we're going to talk about the streams that are not linked to express entry. So these streams do not give you 600 extra points through express entry. They're just through OINP, and you end up applying for your PR through the federal government. So these streams have a different process, and they also calculate points differently. They don't go through the CRS score that we have talked about in the past. They assess different things like your location, your language level, but for example, age doesn't count in these categories, which can be helpful. So the way that these points work, so in order to apply to go through one of these streams, you have to register what's called your expression of interest, or your EOI, and they'll give you a certain number of points based on your background information. And then you're waiting in the pool, in the OINP pool, to receive an invitation. So every now and then Ontario will do a draw, and they'll invite people within these OINP non-express entry linked streams. And then if you get an invitation from them to apply, You have 14 days to give them all of your documents, and then if you get your nomination approved, you can then apply for PR. So these streams, as I said, have different points and different requirements than express entry. Some streams require you to have a job offer. Other streams, like the PhD and master's streams, don't require job offers, but you have to have graduated with one of those degrees within the last 2 years, for example. The thing about these programs, the non-express entry EOI streams, is they don't announce when they're going to be doing their draws beforehand. So with express entry, you usually see that they follow roughly every 2 weeks they're doing a draw. Under the OINP, it can be more sporadic. It can be once a month. Then there can be several months where they're not doing draws. Sometimes they're doing draws for anybody. Sometimes they're doing not code specific draws. So it's really important if you're interested in these streams to just get into the pool as soon as you can, as soon as you qualify, because you never know when they're going to do another draw. And so aside from the streams that I mentioned, for example, like the master's and PhD, there's also other streams that require a job offer. So let's talk about those streams. I think we have a breakdown of the requirements on the next slide. Yes, okay. So for the employer-based streams, so these streams are not linked to express entry, and they require you to have a job offer from an employer that meets certain requirements, and you have to meet certain requirements. So for all of these streams, the business that's supporting your application, so the person or the job that you have a job offer from, they need to firstly have been in business in Ontario for at least 3 years. If they're inside of the GTA, they need to show that their gross income in the last fiscal year was 1 million and that they have 5 full-time Canadian citizen or permanent resident employees. And if they're outside of the GTA, then they need to have at least 500,000 in income and they need to have 3 full-time Canadian or permanent resident employees. The job offer itself has to be full-time and permanent, which means that there's no end date in your contract. And then within each of the streams, there's specific requirements. So one of them is the international student stream. And this stream could be very relevant for you once you graduate. In order to go through the stream, you need to firstly have a job offer that meets those requirements listed above. You need to have completed your program of study in Ontario, and you need to apply for the stream within 2 years of graduation. You have to also have graduated from an eligible program, which means you've either done a 2-year degree or diploma program in Ontario, or a 1-year college program that grants an Ontario College graduate certificate. Aside from having that qualifying education credential within the last 2 years, you need a high-skilled job offer. So that means it needs the high-skilled knock code, and it has to be full-time. And you have to be offered what's called the low wage rate for your occupation according to your location of employment. The next category is the skilled worker. So for this program, this is a separate stream. You need to have, again, a job offer that meets those requirements above. You need to have at least 2 years of work experience within the last 5 years in the same occupation of your job offer. That work experience doesn't have to have been inside of Canada. So say you have foreign work experience within the last 5 years, and then you get a job offer in that same knock here in Ontario, that could be a possibility for using that experience. The job offer, it does have to be high-skilled work, and the salary that you're offered does have to be the median wage for your region. There are no education requirements for this stream, though, so that's one thing to just keep in mind if you're looking into it. And then thirdly, we have the in-demand job stream. So the OINP has a list of occupations that qualify for this stream. It's not just every occupation. There's a very specific list, and it's one of the only programs for the PNPs that does include low-skilled job offers and positions. So for this program, you need to have at least 9 months of experience in Ontario in that same occupation, but it can be with a different employer. The salary that you need to make is the median wage level. And one thing that's a good idea is if you have a spouse who's here in Canada and they're working and they may not be working in a high-skilled job, but they could be working in one of these in-demand jobs. So do take a look at the list of different occupations because it might give you an option to get PR.
And we also find that, with the draws, oftentimes with a skilled worker or international students, they're very occupation specific. So they might just, invite people who are in tech or healthcare, etc. But with the in-demand, they don't necessarily go occupation because it's already occupations that they're looking at. And there's a far higher chance of being selected oftentimes for the in-demand streams compared to the other streams as well.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay, so finally, I just wanted to go over the caregiver program with you guys as well, because it is a program that doesn't require draws. And it could be for yourself, it could be for your spouse. It doesn't matter who's the principal applicant, as long as one of you guys are, right? So for the caregiver program, you need to have 12 months of full-time work experience in Canada, either caring for children, elderly, or disabled people in their own house, okay? Not in a, long-term, home or long-term, what do you call it? Long-term care home or nursing home, etc. In their own house. They're employed, usually the family employs you. If you have 12 months of work experience doing that, you have a 1-year post-secondary education, and your English level meets the CLB bench level 5, most people, I'm pretty sure all of you would have that, then you can qualify and apply for permanent residence. Now, the only thing about this program is it depends on who you're caring for. If you're caring for children, this program closes within an hour of opening, usually on January 1st. If you're taking care of someone who's elderly or disabled, this program is open for far longer. Last year, I think it closed in November. It opened in January, closed in November. So if I had a choice, I probably would advise you guys to take care of someone who's elderly or disabled in their home. But, the reason why I present this is it is a good alternative for some people to get permanent residence because of this. Now, the caregiver program may take a long time for the application to be processed, but at least if you apply for this, you can also apply for a bridging work permit if your current work permit is going to expire, which is also an open work permit as well. Okay, so right now, we have had a lot of people come to us and say, what, my points for express entry is just not high enough. What do we do? So we wanted to give you a few pointers, but I also wanted to say the current conditions for express entry, where the points are so high, is not necessarily going to be in the same situation 2 years down the road. The government really let in an extraordinarily large amount of international students and workers under the humanitarian programs such as Ukraine, Iran, Syria, in the last 2 years, where they didn't really account for how everyone's going to get permanent residence. And that's why, the points are very, very high, because express entry is a competition. Since the government restricted study permits this year, and since they've stopped now allowing for most of the open work permits for humanitarian countries, the number for express entry, I would suspect, will drop down to more normal levels that we had before the pandemic, which was around 470s or so, probably 2 years time or more, like long-term wise. But right now, a lot of people, you guys are getting your work permits. A lot of other people, their work permits might be expiring soon. So we certainly understand that there is a worry that what if you don't have enough points for express entry? So here are some pointers.
So the first thing you should do is you need to seek advice on how you might be able to raise your points. It's going to be a little bit different for everybody depending on what your current points are like, what your personal background is. But there are several things that we see can make a big difference for people, such as getting more work experience inside of Canada and also outside of Canada. That can be a way to very steeply increase points in some cases, is if you can get an extra year of work experience or if you can get a year of work experience even abroad. A big one right now is increasing language scores. So with the way that Express Entry is at the moment, you do pretty much need to be getting CLB level of 9s on your English exams in order to be competitive. So if you're writing an English test and you're finding that you're not scoring there, we do usually recommend, rewrite and continue to rewrite and study until you are getting that, because that's something that is within your control. You're not waiting on an employer, not waiting on more time to pass. You can rewrite that language test whenever it's possible for you. Next is potentially going back to school and getting further education. That can be a good idea in some cases. Another one is getting arranged employment or an employer-specific work permit. So a lot of people think that getting just a job offer from their employer is the same thing as getting arranged employment, and that means they'll get extra points under Express Entry, but it's really not. There's very specific rules about arranged employment. You need to have a work permit that lists your employer as your employer on the work permit. So you have to apply for a work permit with that employer, either through an LMIA or some other kind of LMIA exempt category in order to get arranged employment. But if you do that, you can get 50 and in some cases up to 200 extra points for your Express Entry score. Another one is, getting work experience under the category-based draws. So Elizabeth kind of mentioned this earlier, but if you're in a position where you might have a job opportunity or you could get work in one of those areas that IRCC is really targeting, like healthcare and STEM, make sure that it falls under the knocks that are listed on their website. But that can be a great way to increase your chances of getting a draw through Express Entry. French points, again, we discussed that. Keep in mind, is French a realistic goal for you? But if you do have experience speaking French or you are a French speaker, scoring highly on a French language test is a great way. You can also get up to 50 points there for your Express Entry score. And then finally, qualifying under one of the P&P-based programs, which we discussed earlier. Some of those programs are able to give you, 600 extra points for your Express Entry. So that's another great way to increase your chances of getting a draw.
And then, Express Entry is not the end all and be all for permanent residents. There's a lot of different kinds of programs, and there are some programs that are coming out as well. So there is, for example, the International Student Stream for the PMP caregiver program. There are also entrepreneur routes. If any of you are interested in setting your own business, we can talk about that. And then there's a lot of programs that are regional specific. So the government has announced that they are going to put up some more programs that are community-based in the fall of this year. And probably it's going to be very similar to the RNIP program, which is currently in place, the Rural and Northern Immigrant Program, where if you have a job offer from a specific community, then you may be able to apply for permanent residence directly as well. So stay tuned. I hope you guys have signed up for receiving some news from us. Whenever we get news like that, we will be sending those out to our email list as well.
Another really important thing to do is to keep in status while you're here in Canada. So trying to get as long as you possibly can on your postgrad work permit, that's a really important thing. So if you're doing a 1-year course right now, consider if you need to do another year course to get 3 years on the postgrad work permit instead of 1. That can make a big difference for you having enough time to qualify for PR. Plan on how you might be able to extend your work permit beyond the postgrad work permit. So maybe you have an employer who would be willing to support you and do a labor market impact assessment for your position. Maybe you need to move jobs if that's not the case, or find an employer who is willing to be supportive. Or perhaps there's other work permits out there that you might be able to qualify for. So making a plan well in advance and kind of understanding what's going to happen at the end of your postgrad work permit is really important. Another one is teaming up with your spouse. So don't forget that your spouse can be their own principal applicant in all of this. They might already have work experience while you're studying. They might qualify for a program that you hadn't thought of before. So make sure you're maximizing your options by seeing what kind of programs your spouse could qualify for and seeing what you qualify for, and making a strategic plan about who's going to be the best principal applicant.
Finally, I mean, I think we've already talked about it, plan some more. It's not too early for you guys, even if you guys are just starting your program, to come for a consultation and see what you want to do. Because your programs themselves have an impact on your ability to get postgrad work permits. And you know, sometimes right now, because immigration laws in Canada change so fast, it's not just enough to have one plan. You should have a plan A, a plan B, a plan C as well. Okay. All right. So that being said, I just wanted to put this information there. If you guys want to come for a consultation, email, I think it's probably the easiest way to get a hold of us. And let us know that you've come to our webinar with Fanshaw, and we will give you the student discount. It's $100 for a consultation. We do everything by video conference. You don't have to come to Toronto. All right. Okay, so let's get to some questions over here. We have some questions online, and I know, Christopher, there might be some questions in the classroom as well.
Yeah. Do you just want to alternate maybe?
Yes, let's
okay.
do that. Okay, so Mary, maybe you and I will alternate as well with asking each other questions. So question, this person said some group that they joined on Facebook said that, which is, you know, I'm being very sarcastic, but it Facebook is not a fantastic way to get your information. But some people said on Facebook that one can apply for a 3-year work permit with a 1-year full-time course. How true or possible is this, please?
That's a great question. Generally speaking, so there is a new rule that did come in this year for people who get a master's program in 1 year. They are eligible for a 3-year postgrad work permit. That could potentially be what this person was talking about. Unless you do a master's, if you're doing any other type, like an undergrad or a college program or anything, it is the same rule that Elizabeth described before. So unless you do something, if you do a 2-year program, you can get a 3-year work permit. Anything below that, you're going to get the same amount of time. And definitely to reiterate what Elizabeth said, be really careful about the information you get online. There's a ton of misinformation and confusion. So you're doing the right thing to double check on those kinds of things if they seem suspicious.
Okay, we have a question here.
Hi, I have a question. It's like that. How the Canadian government access the experience of overseas countries?
How do they assess the experience of overseas countries?
Yep.
One of the main things is that we need to have a letter, and normally we draft the letter because employers don't know how to draft the letters. We draft the letters which describes what exactly you do, your duties, your hours, and other things, for example, your salaries, etc. This letter is crucial. If we don't get this letter, it will be rejected. But other things are also often important to substantiate your claim, because sometimes, you know, people can just, you know, get a friend to write the letter, put it on letterhead. So oftentimes the officers may want more information, such as, for example, if you have pay stubs, tax documents, etc. Those are good employment agreements. They're not necessarily essential, but they're good evidence. It depends on, you know, your situation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, shall we go on to another online question? Mary, maybe I'll ask this for you.
Sure.
So it says, this person says, my wife's work permit is expiring on July 30th. I am applying for a postgrad work permit within a few days. Do I need to apply for extension right now while I am applying for my postgrad work permit, or can I extend her work permit later?
So with this one, as long as her work permit is valid and you apply to extend her work permit before it expires, she'll have implied status while she's waiting for a decision on the application. It's going to depend a little bit on the logistics for you and your wife. For example, are you planning on traveling? What kind of position are you going to be starting? When are you going to be starting your position, to make a proper decision about exactly when you should apply for her postgrad work permit extension? but you will need to have a job in order to be able to apply to extend her work permit. So you may want to wait until you have that job to be able to apply to extend her open spousal work permit.
Okay, we have one here.
Okay. Is it advisable switching from agribusiness program to health sector program? Like if I'm to do 2 years program?
Is it advisable to switch to a completely different topic? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. As long as you can, demonstrate that you actually genuinely want to study in another program, and you can extend your study permit, that's fine. For most of the permanent residence programs where you're showing that you, want to apply for under a certain occupation, it doesn't necessarily mean that that occupation has to be related to your program of study. Certain occupations, like, for example, a lawyer, will require you to have a degree, right, in that occupation. But I would say 99% of occupations do not have a mandatory education requirement. And so, it really doesn't, people often think, oh, the work that I do has to be related to my program. There is no such thing really in most programs for permanent residents. All right. Mary, when will a spouse be able to study if he or she is on a dependent full-time work permit and his or her spouse is currently studying? Will his or her spouse be able to work when he or she starts studying?
I'm a little confused by this question.
Confused.
I'm not sure who is studying and who's working here.
I think, okay, so let's say someone is
Hang on, this question was actually from somebody in the room, so we'll just let her
okay, so
clarify.
okay, that'd be
Okay,
great.
Okay.
Yes.
Actually, the question is a little bit confusing. Sorry. I was like trying to ask that currently I'm studying and my husband is in an open work permit, right? And if he plans to study, then what are the circumstances? And if he starts studying, then will I be able to work that time? That's what I meant to ask. Yeah.
Right. So in order for your husband to be able to study, he does need to have a study permit if he's planning on taking a course that's more than 6 months long or on a full-time basis. So he would need to apply for a study permit. And then once he's studying, you could apply for an open spousal work permit. But if you're currently studying, then I'm not sure if from an immigration point of view, you may want to wait until your study permit is over and then switch and have him start studying and you're working. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, though.
There was this policy last year, and I don't know if your husband qualifies, but if he had a work permit, I think it was before June something of last year, he can study without a study permit. But getting the post-grad work permit is something that is important as well. And I do believe from the policies, it seems like you should have a study permit in order to get the post-grad work permit at the end. So if you wanted to come to us and figure out a plan, come to us. It sounds like your situation is a little bit complicated. So it's good that you are thinking about teaming up with your spouse in order to apply for permanent residence, because that's a very good idea. Spouses can, not only do you love them, they're also very good to apply together for permanent residence as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
All right.
So I can do one for you online.
Okay.
If I have a master's degree back to my home country but did not show before, can I show it when I apply for postgrad work permit or PR?
Okay, so this is, I think, someone who didn't declare their education. This can be very problematic. Oftentimes when people come to Canada and they're applying for something, they get bad advice from consultants who basically tell them, oh, don't declare this. You can't get a study permit if you have a master's. and which is not true, but the officer, by doing that, you've basically committed a misrep on your application. Applying for anything else, you're supposed to declare everything and be absolutely honest and truthful. And you know, there's different ways you can deal with former misrep. You can, you know, declare it and let the officer know, and you know, hopefully they'll forgive you. But you know, as lawyers, we certainly can't advise you to not declare something, because you're supposed to declare everything on there. Okay. Can you tell us about common law chances in PR? What are common law?
It's an interesting one. Okay, so common law can be, so sometimes, so there's being legally married. That's one designation for your relationship status for immigration. Another one is having a common law spouse. So if you've lived with somebody for 12 consecutive months in a conjugal relationship, then you're considered common law. They're considered your common law spouse under immigration law. And that actually means you do need to include them and declare them when you're doing your application. So even if you didn't realize that you had become in a common law relationship, or you had met that requirement, if you're living with your partner and you're renting an apartment together, or you've lived together for 12 months, that does mean that you are in a common law relationship for immigration purposes, which has the same impact as being married. So that means that you can claim points for them on your express entry. They can claim points for you. If they are to get PR, then you can accompany them as their spouse. But it also means, again, just to be very careful about how you're declaring them on your applications, on your taxes. You want to make sure that you are properly representing your relationship status, and you're not accidentally omitting that and then accidentally misrepresenting to immigration about your marital status. Okay, so do I need to show the fund proof?
Okay, so it depends on which program. It depends on how you qualify. For example, express entry for the federal skilled worker class, yes, you do need to show that you meet LICO funds, which update, and they've just updated for this year as well, every year. If you qualified under Canadian experience class, you do not have to show proof of funds as well. You're exempt from that. Or if you have arranged employment, you don't have to show proof of funds. So it depends on which category, what kind of program that you're applying for. So this next one says, for express entry, can my spouse's French language proficiency increase my score as well as OIMP?
Okay, so your spouse's French language proficiency, I don't believe it can add under express entry. Elizabeth, there's no extra points for French yet.
Not for spouse, but I don't understand why they wouldn't apply it.
Exactly. So the thing that this question makes me think is, has your spouse assessed what their points would be under express entry? Could they apply as the principal applicant? Because French draws under the category streams are usually a very low threshold, and it can be very easy to get an invitation if you have a certain level of French. So while their points probably under their French language scores don't give you extra points, they might be able to qualify on their own as a French speaker. Okay, so while applying for here, I did not show my master's. Same question, it looks like. Okay, I studied agribusiness management course, which is 12 months course, and now I'm planning to study 8-month course personal support worker. So will I be eligible for a 3-year postgrad work permit or not?
Yes, yes, you can. It doesn't matter what course it is. It matters if it's from a public college or university, and it depends on the length of time in between. So you have to finish this the second one within 2 years of graduating from the first one. Great. I think we're done. Oh, we have one more. Okay, for extending spousal visa, does an application need an NOC level job? I think they're thinking about a high skilled job.
So last year they updated the rules for getting an open spousal work permit, and you can actually support an open spousal work permit if you have a high skilled or a low skilled job at the moment.
Christopher, do we have any more hands up in the room?
No, I think we're good here. So really
Okay.
want to thank you for your time. This was really generous of you both to donate your time to this. And yeah, I was excited for people to have an opportunity to ask questions and learn some of this because we really want all of our students to kind of accomplish their goals. So again, really appreciate it, and a big thank you from all of us here.
Oh, it was certainly our pleasure to be here, and just wanted to say, it's not an easy road to be an immigrant to a country. You guys have accomplished so much already, leaving everything behind and coming to school and coming to a brand new country. And don't give up. It's certainly not an easy road, but it can be very doable for you guys. You guys have taken the right first steps. And if you need any help, come and find us. We're happy to help you. Okay. Take care,
Thank you,
everyone.
Mary. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.